So, why Venezuela and why now? We all know that Donald Trump needs all the distraction failure to prepare for World Cup 2026. So, but since September, when those first boats were interdicted and the first what will turn out to be documented as murders occurred, um, you know, that's 3 months ago already. And what's the rationalization for doing this or doing this now? Oil is one thing. It's kind of an easy answer, and it seems almost um, trite and cartoonish. Say, well, the U.S. needs a more reliable supply of oil, so we subterfuge and we generate this conflict out of whole cloth in order to capture oil. Okay, the U.S. has done worse in the past. That Nicolas Maduro is a bad guy. We all know that Nicolas Maduro is a bad guy, and he harms the Venezuelan people on a daily basis, and he's been at it since dear brother Hugo Chavez went to meet his maker. Um, but why U.S. Hopefully not boots on the ground, but why U.S. assets, and why, when we were promised by your president DJT, no more foreign wars. Let's just put the new Monroe Doctrine bullshit aside for a few minutes. But this is a conflict, if not a war, of it's a choice. There is no imminent danger to the United States. If fentanyl is a genuine risk, cocaine's a drug that plagues many countries and will do so tomorrow and years after DJT leaves this realm. Excuse me, fentanyl is a major threat. So if Donald J. Trump wanted to put forward a fentanyl policy that would help Americans, to keep Americans from dying in embarrassingly high numbers due to this drug, then he would have to interdict the drug at its source, which is China or countries largely adjacent to China and wholly owned subsidiaries of China. For instance, Myanmar, the former Burma, where what there's a useful analogy between the ills of TikTok, which, despite news reports to the contrary, is still largely controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. You can you can drill down as much as you want on the stories of the Ellisons and other conservative thought leaders taking over the control of the American or the domestic algorithm from Chinese. They will control as much as China wants them to control, which will be ultimately not much. They'll be able to make money on it because they'll be able to sell the advertising on TikTok in the United States and reap the benefits of that commercial transaction, that activity. But as far as TikTok being weaponized by the Chinese Communist Party to the detriment of America's youth and our democratic system and our voting system and others, China will maintain control of all of the levers necessary to continue the interference in our governance and elections. Fentanyl is similar because China retains the control over the flow of fentanyl that runs from there, for our purposes, largely to Mexico, and is processed there, and then brought into the U.S. mostly over the southern border, or using those semi-submersible, we'll call them submarines, but they're less than that, and coming in at various points of the West Coast. When China wants to exert influence, meaning cause greater disruption to the United States population, it can turn the dials on TikTok and fentanyl anytime it wants, anytime at all. And it sounds almost on the level of conspiracy theories. But so much of what you might have thought was only a work of fiction prior to DJT and what he's done with the Orwellian use of jackbooted thugs in urban areas to try to influence the power dynamics in American cities, disrupt cities that are run by Democratic governors, and to lay the predicate for disruption of elections next year, which is clearly what he's trying to do. So we have an American president in full or in part influenced by one professional autocrat in Vladimir Putin, and on the other side, the true master of the universe at this point, which is Xi Jinping. And anytime he wants to change any aspect of the relationship between the United States and China, all he has to do is push the buttons, because he is free to do as he wants. There is the level of fear in President Xi's mind, body, and soul over Trump and the United States is as close to zero as you can get without being zero. He's got nothing to worry about. He's got nothing to worry about. There's nothing, we can't intimidate them militarily or otherwise. And as I suggested, they can directly affect our well-being through levers that they control, like fentanyl and TikTok, to begin with. To begin with, why, as I put forth the question last week, why then would Xi allow the U.S. adventurism in Venezuela when that actually adversely affects the energy supply, the oil that China needs desperately to keep the trains running on time? There's a trade-off. The the vessel that was seized, regardless of it was flagged initially in Central America and then maybe Uganda. Flags can be switched around like Halloween costumes, and false flag operations would not even begin to paint an accurate portrait of how easily that can be done. So this is, as we discussed a week or 10 days ago, what China does is it gets its oil from Venezuela and Brazil and Iran and other places. But it can take those tankers and run them if it needs an intermediate point where it can offload some of the oil. They can do that in Cuba. And and most, if not all of the Venezuelan oil, and remember that China has contracts for 87+% of all Venezuelan production. And they run the tankers through Malaysia, and then they make their way on to China. So that is how it was and how it will be. But what is Xi's motivation for allowing the ridiculous behavior by the Trump administration in Venezuela that directly affects Xi's energy supply? Well, as I put forth as a hypothetical, because it's not proven. I haven't interviewed a spy recently from the Chinese Communist Party ever. But you can put, if you want to do 1+1, what does China care the most about? She has been doing house cleaning in the military. It's a tough time for him right now because because of corruption and other reasons, he's had to essentially clean out the upper echelon of Chinese military leadership, and he needs time to put people back, loyalists back in place, and move forward. That can't happen overnight. They have a big machine to keep running. So, what does she care the most about this year, next year, and the following? Is Taiwan. He wants to have a frictionless opportunity to repatriate Taiwan because he considers Taiwan to be part of China, just as he considers Hong Kong to be, and it is structurally, Hong Kong is, just as uh, that very troubling conviction of Jimmy Lai, who is a newspaper owner and democracy advocate, uh, pretty close to the age of 80, and just got convicted, and he'll be put away as an example. There will be some horse trading coming up, I imagine, when the U.S. and European leaders go to meet with President Xi in the spring. But that's a scalp that he probably wants to keep in prison. So my just as I suggested that this tanker that was captured by the U.S. In the Caribbean was that's Chinese oil. They already paid for it. You can say it's Venezuelan oil, but it hasn't been the Venezuelans. They've been paid in full for that oil perhaps a year ago, and there will be more transactions like that. What would what would the bargain be for Xi? It would be a hands-off approach or a bluster only, hue, cry, screaming, kicking, Donald Trump giving stern warnings sounds like a senator from Maine, that the U.S. will not stand by and watch a democratic administration in Taiwan be subjected to the authoritarian rule, which used to be a really good argument when we stood by our allies and when we operated as a democracy. But our standing is such right now that when we get on a soapbox and talk about democratic ideals and values, people will have to change their depends on a regular basis because they will be, I think there's a medical term for, they will be pissing themselves laughing at any U.S. government official, particularly Pistol Pete Hegseth, Little Marco Rubio, or Donald Trump. Don't even get me started on J.D. Vance denying that my wife is Indian and my beautiful children. When they get up and they scream bloody murder, like the U.S. is not going to stand for this. The U.S. has no choice at this point because we have surrendered our standing in the world to make principled arguments for rules-based order, rule of law, any of those traditional structures that allowed us to, when necessary, project power. It really ain't there anymore. And every single day that the Trump administration is in power, that the Republicans in Congress lay down, pants down, under their desks and quiver, every day that the Supreme Court expands executive power, unitary executive theory, or any of those unrelated or related and unattractive redheaded stepchildren that the Supreme Court is coddling and sitting on top of in its nest, hoping it will grow and expand. We're getting weaker by the day, and until Donald Trump is no longer in the White House, the U.S. will be weaker each and every day and be less able to stand up against Chinese aggression. We're not worried about, we've already surrendered on behalf of Ukraine to Russia, but that's a complicated scenario because, Trump is under Putin's influence. But put that all aside, easy for us to say because we're not living in Kiev trying to put up a Christmas tree or a menorah and having missiles come through our windows. But the only real risk to the United States is China. Is now, today, tomorrow, 30 years down the line. There ain't no other. Our greatest risk is ourselves. Our greatest risk is allowing an authoritarian regime to bloom within our country in what was once, if you'll excuse me, the fertile soil of democracy, stealing lines perhaps from Mr. Jefferson, slave owner. That country, that ideal that we used to support and allow to grow and flourish in our own country, and then spread across the world in other countries where they are, the aspiration was a democratic system with free and fair elections. That's fractured. And Donald Trump is is only 1 year into a 3-year term. The only focus we can have right now is midterm elections, which will allow, yeah, uh, if, when we are victorious in the midterms, we can exert pressure on our brothers and sisters in Congress, and thereby on the Trump administration, and start investigating the Trump children and the Wyckoff children and the corruption, and start to get some more answers. I know about pardon power. What are we going to waste all the time doing investigations for if he can turn around and pardon everybody? That taking that position is cowardice and a form of surrender, because unless you have the hearings, then you cannot let the American public know in a free and fair and open manner what is being done in their name and what is being done to harm the country without the hearings. But that's we still got 2026 to get through before the midterms. We have what I'm imagining will be a tremendous embarrassment in the World Cup, because of they just added another 6 countries to the bad country list this morning, and they're just trying to I think, list any country that has a black or brown majority in the world and put them on a State Department travel ban list, um, and just keep bringing in white African farmers, which is just horrible. So I went off on a China doesn't give an F about Trump, or they care, but they're not. There's nothing that the U.S. can do to strike fear into Xi Jinping. We don't have the tools to do it. Sanctions? Laughing. He turns around and says, rare earth metals? No. Got you again. Got you again. When he's ready, when his military is ready, he'll control Taiwan. Perhaps he'll do it in a way that is a little bit more uh, gentle than he could, because he has the strength to do what he wants. But back to Venezuela briefly, and I'll let you go for the day. I lived there. I visited too many times to count. Passionately love the country and the people, the music, the food, the beaches, the mountains, the Keys. I mean, Key West got nothing on the Cayos in Venezuela. Magical place, just absolutely beautiful. Diving and fishing, and and they make some of the world's greatest rum, which would have been more impactful if I actually drank alcoholic beverages any longer. A magical country, has been under tremendous pressure. Chavez, I remember when I was living there and when I was visiting, that one of the things that I did to work on my Spanish was to listen to Hugo Chavez used to have a program on Sundays called A lo Presidente. And he would he would get up in front of a microphone and speak coherently, without hesitation, without breaks, without for hours on end, hours and hours and hours on end. And it was socialismo, and it was, all of the things, the George Bush, I smell sulfur, and all of the fun things that made Hugo Chavez who he was. And it was a different time. It was, Fidel was still kicking. Hugo Chavez. It was a high time for socialismo or communism in the Caribbean and in Central and parts of South America. Now, Chile just elected Chile, a country that goes back and forth to the extremes every few years. I mean, they go from not just a dance step left and one to the right, but you know, this the new president, his, you'll excuse me, I don't have my notes with me, but his father was an actual Nazi. His brother worked for Pinochet at the end of his regime. This is a way far right, ultra hyper nationalist, fascist. Pick your term. But they've also gone far to the left, and it'll happen again. It's just that the trend, except for Lula da Silva, is decidedly to the right, with the coattails of Donald Trump. And when you're an extreme right leader, like Milei in Argentina, and you can say my economy's in trouble, and Donald Trump takes $40 billion of your hard-earned taxpayer money and gives it to Argentina so he can support right-wing governments in the hemisphere. Is that the best use of your money? Instead of, for instance, affordable health care for all Americans and SNAP benefits for the poor, giving the money away, and by virtue of doing that, harming American farmers and cattle men and women. Is that the best use? Is that what you MAGA and America First folks thought when you were voting for Donald Trump, that you were going to be subsidizing right-wing dictatorships in Latin America for sport? And without the formalities of involving Congress in any of this, Donald Trump is just writing checks for billions and billions of your money, not his money. He's made billions of dollars for his family while he's been in office. He's done that. He's he's made sure that generations of the Trump family will have not a financial worry for maybe a millennium if they invest wisely. And that is by selling influence to your government and creating advantages for his family to set up companies, to sell access to the White House and to the American government. So, sure, you're not a financier, you are not a hedge fund guy, you're not a you're not Bill Ackman, screaming hair on fire, nice hair, by the way, that Mamdani is going to force all of the rich people to leave New York or whatever that is. Um, you're not a Prof G calling Mamdani an anti-Semite without thinking about it. You're not one of those people. But would you like a little more consideration for Americans? Would you like a little more consideration for the poor in our country? Would you like more consideration for real Americans, MAGA voters, or at least conservative or at least Republican voters in red states that all of a sudden are going to be paying, instead of $200 to $300 a month for health insurance, they're going to be paying $2,000 a month starting next month? Would you like more consideration for Americans from a president that promised to be America first and to end foreign wars? So right now he's blowing up your budget, making sure that the poor in your communities are going hungry, killing some innocent, some guilty Venezuelans, Colombians, and other residents of the Caribbean region. As I fully would agree that some of the people on some of the boats were acting as couriers for the bigger fish. These are not narco traffickers in the traditional sense. You couldn't make a good movie out of these characters. These are people that operate boats and that carry cargo. And if there was a better market for it, then they would be carrying uh, fish and produce between the beautiful Venezuelan island of Margarita and Aruba and Bonaire and Curacao and in the other direction to Trinidad and Tobago, and doing trade the way that islanders in the Caribbean have done since long before Fred Trump came to the country and helped his wife become a naturalized citizen to have Donald and his siblings. I would argue, since the entire campaign seemed to be predicated on America first and no more foreign wars, that there may be people out there that aren't comfortable with Donald Trump using keeping a carrier battle group in the Caribbean that every month burns, we'll say about, let's call it $100 million for all of the support systems that keep the carrier battle group, because it's big, it ain't getting smaller, in the Caribbean, and support it. That money couldn't be better spent anywhere in your community. Farmers, yeah, they're getting handouts, and that's great. They'd rather presumably work for that. Farmers are some of the hardest working people, or at least were before as much mechanization in the country. But they're kind of part of the fabric of America. They're getting part of your tax dollars instead of going to healthcare and food for the poor and other initiatives. That they're getting farmers are getting that cash. They'll get checks and they'll be made, if not whole, they'll be okay. But when February comes around and many members of your family and community have had to drop their healthcare coverage because you just can't all of a sudden have to pay out an additional $16,000 a year for healthcare, and that's going to get worse because clinics will close, and and the insurance companies aren't going to give you a leg up. Ask the question. Call your rep. Say, kind sir, kind madam, or what the fuck? We voted you into office to protect us. We're not looking for a handout. We're not looking for free money. We'll work, but you are you are giving the advantage to people named Trump and their friends at the expense of the voters that put you, Trump administration and Republicans in office. Can we just want some fairness. We want a little balance. What do you say? I hope it's a lot louder and more colorful and vociferous than what I put forth. But that's you do you. They deserve a verbal beating, a nonviolent podcast, nonviolent stream. You need to make your voices heard, and making your voices heard always gets me back to collective action. So pick that one purchasing decision that you see you need to buy um, appliances for a new kitchen. You need to buy a dryer because yours just died. You need to you save some money, so you're going to buy in bulk. You're going to team up with you live in a condominium, and you're going to team up with the people on your in your building to go to Costco, reward a retailer that is doing the right thing by the American people and doing the right thing by their own employees. You can see the testimonials. You don't have to listen to me. But 2026, you do the math, and the 10 people in your building, the 10 families, sit down and you buy chicken, toilet paper, laundry detergent, and 7 other items that are particularly ones that are uh, the most adversely affected by Donald Trump's tariffs. And you buy as a kind of a collective. Smells like socialism, but it works. And you all of a sudden you've cut your costs by 15 or 20%. It it may go half of the way to paying for the increased cost of healthcare coverage. But there are so many families out there that are just going to have to choose to drop coverage, which causes if you'll excuse the expression, a death spiral on the American economy. Because if all of a sudden there are tens of thousands of Americans that are kicked off of healthcare or choose to no longer pay for healthcare coverage because they can't afford it, however you want to characterize that, then when those people get sick, they go to the emergency room. The US government ends up paying for it, but they end up paying for it at 10 times, 20 times the cost if these individuals were covered and there was kind of a proactive approach to healthcare as opposed to a reactive approach to emergency room medicine. It will overburden particularly rural hospitals and clinics. And all of that expense will flow back to the US government, but in a 10 to 20x manner. So that's another reason to be not grateful for your government in action or inaction. Another reason to start considering uh, making some intelligent buying decisions, and how can you get involved in your local politics, because the people that lied down, lied to you, and then lied down don't deserve to have a job. So plan to make a change. Venezuela. I started there. I'm going to finish there, even though I got off on a tangent. I thought about uh, Christmas celebrations in Venezuela over a lot of years, mostly in the, I guess the vast majority of them were in the early 2000s. The joy of a beautiful country where people value time with family. And this isn't a Christian message. I'm barely a Christian. I dabble in Judaism in as much as my beautiful bride I cares to consider me to be horizontally conscious with her. But all of these families that are going to have empty chairs at the table during the holidays because their family members were out fishing, or were some of them acting as couriers with a lancha, with a open day sailor a launch, drugs from uh, the beaches of Chichiriviche to a larger vessel that is equipped to travel a longer distance and bring the drugs to Haiti, where often that's a transshipment point to the US, or a little bit to the east to Trinidad, and then north and east via Africa to Europe. Cocaine. There's an appetite. But these are human beings that were blown out of the water with no due process. These are people, as I've said before, as we've talked about on this feed. There is a tried and true, proven process using the U.S. Coast Guard to interdict drug traffickers, bring them to justice, try them, and convict them, and put them in prison. Confiscate the drugs, burn it, or I mean, in the case of the Trump administration, I wouldn't be surprised if Trump is selling the fentanyl back to China so it can make a round trip. But that's just me. So you have Chinese oil. We're given permission to play in China's playground because they already bought the oil. The fentanyl could be turned off by China if they chose to. And anytime they want to turn up the dial on that and on TikTok, they can do it just by pushing a button. So that is the cheerful pre-holiday message on elections have consequences, version 5. And that is a warning, a clarion call, and and just a big WTF. If you thought that it was going to work out differently, whatever. You know now. You know. So behave accordingly, and love your family. Love your family more than JD Vance does his, and show your family the respect and dignity that they deserve, much more than JD Vance does. And we will connect. I'm sure at some point tomorrow. Thank you so much, and have a beautiful evening from uh, uh, a cold yet beautiful and seasonably little bit of sprinkle of white northern Massachusetts. And good night to all.